and the destruction of the Babri Masjid. You've written extensively about partition violence. And 40 years ago, you wrote a book called The Intimate Enemy, The Loss and Recovery of Self Under Colonialism. This session itself is called Living with Violence, the Demons Within Us. Would you explain to us what you think are the demons within us? Who and what is the intimate enemy?
Frankly, the title was not chosen by me. It has been imposed on me. Otherwise, I would have probably started at a different level, and I would have tried to ask you a counter question. Okay. I would like to ask you a counter question as to why do you think these inner demons are something we have to live with, or we try to somehow are driven by them? That's the question. I mean, I think in my imagination I have been very violent. I not only study violence, but in my imagination I would like to kill quite a lot of people. But they are not my inner demons, however. You know, because most of them I find will die not from diseases or from natural causes, but by their sheer foolishness. Because they think that they can, by violence, get their way. Or if you ask me what has been my own learning about violence from my own work, I would say that it is the fact that I have become aware, very much aware, that violence itself takes an enormous toll of the killers. If you see Oppenheimer's film on the killings in Indonesia in the 1950s, mid-50s, if I remember correctly, he, in his documentary on the subject, actually makes the killers play roles which they had played during the killings. And though Oppenheimer is not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but without knowing his picture of his portrayal of the killers and the responses of the killers reveals in this documentary to be basically all psychologically disturbed, some of them heavily so. Similarly, in my study of the partition violence, we ran into several killers. And over the period of something like 20-25 years, I have met only one killer who seemed to me a normal, functioning individual. The rest are different variations of the kind of killers I would expect to now, I now expect to meet, who are themselves in the process of killing has lost their sense. I can give you some stories on that also, but I don't want to take that much of time. Only one person in the partition killing, because he had the attitude of almost like fighting a war. They were attacked and they hit back. They resisted and in the process killed. And he is the only one I have met possible can be truly be classified as a normal person, human being after the experience. The rest are all psychologically bent. They are living they're living with their past, and many of them have not lived a very happy life. I mean, for example, everybody knows that about this case, that there was this Bajrang Patel or something, who in Gujarat riots killed a lot of people. Now he is now in jail, but he has turned schizophrenic from the accounts I've heard already. So this is not abnormal. This is the normal record. If I can give you another example. Udayan Patel once told me in Bombay that accidentally he ran in Chopatti into a group of killers who had looted an electronic shop during a riot and killed the owner, who was a huge man. And the killer, so he got interested. I said, may I join? And he listened to this, and they were happily said, yes, why not? They didn't know that he was a psychiatrist.
Let me just
I want to finish this. He said to me that this man described in great detail how he killed this Ravan, whom we call Ravan, the owner of the shop, because he is also a huge man, so on and so forth. And then how he went home peacefully, and his sister had cooked his food and started normal life. But while leaving and dispersing, he left his card to all of them. So in case you need me ever, do give me a ring. One day, when he was getting out of his clinic in the evening, he came out and found this man, the killer, waiting, and said, I want to talk to you. He said, I'm going out today. Can you come another day? He said, no, I want to tell you what my problem is. He said that Ravan I talked about is taking his revenge, because I cannot sleep, I have lost my appetite, and whenever I'm about to feel, this Ravan now takes the form of some kind of insect and enters through my toes into my body. Anyway, I don't want to go into the details. So this kind of, the psychopaths are also psychotic often. And that's the way they learn to live for the rest of the life. Killing has its own costs. That's what I want to tell you.
Yeah. So, but I think there are many ways in which one can think about the question of violence, and particularly the question of violence in India. And perhaps we can revisit in just a few minutes some of the ways in which the violence of the partition, for example, is very different than the violence of the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a form of social engineering, and what is remarkable about the partition, when you look at the testimonies of people, is that many of the people say that they can't really understand how it happened. it just happened in a way. They have really no explanation. People who were very close to each other suddenly turned upon each other. Right? So I think that there are different ways in which one can think about it. Let me just go back, however, to the question of colonialism for a moment. From my standpoint, at least, I think one of the most powerful books that has ever been written upon colonialism is your own book, The Intimate Enemy, to which I referred earlier, The Loss and Recovery of Self Under Colonialism. And this is really a book about the violence of colonialism. Right? Now, would you say that the violence that was visited upon us through colonialism is still with us, and that in some ways, perversely, we have actually improved upon it because we are now a nation state? And is it not the case that violence is intrinsic to the very idea of the nation state?
Yes, the victims do have their way of internalizing what they are victims of. And it is our job to give this message to the victims that they are not only victims, they have in some sense become a carbon copy, if not a carbon copy, partial copy of the killers, of the oppressors. And until and unless they learn to be conscious of that fact, this chain of killing and passing on the idea of killing, whether it is in the form of a nuclear warfare or in the form of small term riots, there is no escape for paying the cost of killing. It doesn't have to come through law. It doesn't have to come through law. It comes through the inner processes within your body. Human beings are genetically not programmed to kill. In fact, it is very difficult to train a person to kill. Previously, in the American system, this is one example only. American system, they used to do target practice, which our army still does. You set up targets and you shoot at them. Now, the Americans have found out, this is because European data now shows that a large proportion of soldiers, even in wartime, when a world war was being fought, even then, the moment the officers are absent there, and the moment there are other soldiers are not nearby, they do not fire to kill. They shoot, but deliberately they try not to kill. So they got scared. So the now American target practice is very different. They no longer set up targets and allow the people to see how close they go to the target and that kind of stuff. They have set up things where the cardboard or wooden cutouts of the target are set, human beings, and they come out. It's like a stage. They come out from the two sides and come, and you are supposed to shoot at them without seeing immediately. You are no longer given the time to think that you are practicing killing, or you are no longer given time to think that here is a human being there. So it comes and you have to hit. And that has been sophisticated now more and more, and you get better killers if you think. But I do not think that solves the problem of mental health of the soldiers beyond a point. Ultimately, you have to pay the cost of killing.
Was there not a famous experiment that was conducted at Stanford several decades ago? I think it's the milligram experiment, where it was shown that the most normal people can be pushed into committing acts of violence very easily under certain circumstances. Right?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So
it is true that there are psychopaths who begin to enjoy killing. There are individuals who are psychologically disturbed enough to do that. But even amongst the Nazi Germans, there were soldiers who had psychological problems, had to be hospitalized. You know, the Nazis were supposed to be ruthless killers, but even there, such cases exist.
Let me ask you about violence with regards to an idea that you have put forward in many of your books. I want to ask you about the question of violence in relationship to what you call the imperialism of categories. In much of your work, you have described a very, what we might describe as a very strange kind of modern phenomenon under which certain terms acquire a new life and that the older terms become entirely obsolete. So therefore, social change becomes development. The oppressed become the proletariat, right? The cultures that were oral cultures become the cultures of the primitive. And I think that in much of your work you have argued that this also is in fact actually a kind of violence.
Yes, that is also one kind of violence. And I think, let me put it this way, that one of the key factors, I mean, we all have lived through so many riots in India. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that all of you have either experienced or seen or been told about or informed by newspapers about riots. Now, one thing I found out in my work, that it is the cruelest and most violent forms of riots, and I would say also I should use the word cruel, deliberately, cruelest forms of violence, of the kind which, for example, you hear of partition violence in Punjab particularly, not so much in Bengal, though there were huge riots, but not that cruelty which you saw in Punjab. This kind of cruel violence comes mainly when the two parties are not strangers, but are very close to each other. Like in Punjab, the Hindus and the Muslims were very closely intertwined. In Bengal, at least, there was a hierarchical difference. Most of the Muslims were poorer, and most of the landowners were Hindus. So it was a slightly different story. But wherever this intimacy and closeness comes very close, that leads to more cruelty and leads to more violence. The annihilatory imagination enters the picture there. This is partly because I have a feeling this is the case with the German Jews, because German Jews were the most integrated Jews in Europe. They all spoke German, they were in many ways, they intermarried and so on and so forth. And yet, yet they become the targets. And similarly, in Rwanda, for instance, the Hutus versus Tutsis, it is well known that these two communities were so close that anthropologists felt that they could not culturally differentiate them. There was a lot of intermarriage. Likewise, in the case of the violence in this is quite recent, you know.
In the Balkans? In the Balkans?
In Balkans.
In the Balkans? So,
but not Balkans. The Muslims were the targets there.
Yeah, Kosovo, Bosnia.
Kosovo. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That.
Right.
Now, in Kosovo, the data was available that something like 10% of the Muslims were married. In the intermarriage of Serbs and Muslims were something like 10% of all marriages. But if you ask them about their relationships, they will say something like 30% of the people said that they have Serb relatives. And it was one of the cruelest and almost unprovoked violence that they had to face, the Muslims.
Yes.
This is because in this kind of thing, there is this other problem. In fact, one psychiatrist said that in the case of Kosovo, that we were lived happily, peacefully, and unaware that we were a divided people. Now the Serbs, some of the leaders found out that they could convince their countrymen that the other Serbs that they have been suffering because of the Muslims. This is one. I'm giving this example because this is very close to also our experience in many other places. You concentrate on the majority community over a period of time and convince them that they have been discriminated against. And gradually the majority begins to think like a minority. And then this gives you a perfect alibi that you, first of all, mobilize the majority community as possible killers, but also in the process you ensure, suppose by one of the questions nowadays many people ask me is, why are there so many countries becoming undemocratic, authoritarian? Erdogan in Turkey, Duterte in Philippines,
and so on.
So on and so forth.
Yeah.
You know, it's a long list now. One of the reasons for this is this, that once you have mobilized the majority community in this fashion, and they begin to think like a minority, but on the other hand, in the electoral system, they ensure your continuity.
Right.
So the democratic system, you have technically protect the democratic system, but you also ensure your survival in politics.
So,
it is perfectly safe. And, but the other important point is this, that this kind of cruelty comes when the two, as I said at the beginning, that you you are so close to each other that you are, on both sides, you feel, particularly by the dominant party, that you are contaminated by the presence of the other within you. And you, while killing the other, you are ensuring that the other within you is also eliminated from within you. You are purified by that killing.
Many of the animosities that you have described were actually captured by Freud in a phrase which he called the narcissism of minor differences. That people who are very close to each other, in fact, are the ones who are very likely to actually be extremely hostile to the other. But you know, we have very little time remaining, and I had a number of questions which I'm going to have to skip, but I just want to get to the last set of questions very quickly. That is that you have written on a vast array of subjects, moving effortlessly from popular cinema, cricket, cuisine, to cultures of science, secularism, politics, genocide, Gandhi, the mathematician, the life of the mathematician Ramanujan, and so on and so forth. I mean, who else but you could have written a piece called The Philosophy of Coca-Cola? Or who else could have written a book on cricket called The Tao of Cricket, the very first line of which is that cricket is an Indian game accidentally discovered by the British. So what I want to ask you very simply is, what is your thought about thought? What is the nature of thought for you?
I never thought that I thought. I've been always been challenged by looking for, by the idea of looking within, not without. Looking within a person. To me, everybody is a potential killer and everybody is a potential victim. There's this Prasanna, this Kannada playwright and theatre director.
Yes.
He used my work on the assassination of Gandhi to make his group, everybody play in the same moment, the role of both Nathuram Godse and the role of Gandhi. So, making it clear that the two vectors, Godse as a vector and Gandhi as a vector, are within all of us. And this is a very different way of looking at the killers, because to some extent, in fact, Bruno Bettelheim, the psychoanalyst, takes a very strong position on this, that do not study these killers that much, because then you will come to the conclusion they could not but be what they are. So they are not responsible for their killings. They are responsible for, they are driven by their past. So that part of the story. This is the one way of looking at it.
Okay. Last question, which is the following. In asking this question, it's got two small questions within it. In asking this, I am thinking of a conversation that took place between Gandhi and a Christian clergyman who visited him in the late 1930s by the name of Reverend Mott. But in asking this question, I'm also asking you this question because I don't think there's anyone else in this room who has thought for that long a period of time about the nature of our society, about politics, and so on. Reverend Mott asked Gandhi the following question. And the answer that Gandhi gave him is an answer that has haunted me ever since. They had been conversing for several days, and then Reverend Mott says to Gandhi, "What is it, Bapuji, that fills you with the greatest despair?" And Gandhi replied, "The hard-heartedness of the educated."
Of the?
Of the educated. The hard-heartedness of the educated. And then Reverend Mott asked him, "What is it that fills you with the greatest hope?" And Gandhi replied, "In the midst of all of these provocations, our people still largely abide by ahimsa."
Pardon me?
By ahimsa, by nonviolence. So I want to ask you in closing, especially for the benefit of the young here, what is it that fills you at this moment in our history that gives you the greatest despair, and what is it that gives you the greatest hope at this moment?
At this moment?
Yes.
I mean, the first part of it can be easily explained. The hard-heartedness of the educated, say for instance the middle class, if you like, or otherwise also, is partly because they have a larger range of self-justification, and it acts as a safety valve for them, and that kind of justifies what they are doing. A middle class, I mean, I don't have to tell you this, because in India we see a lot of such cases now. These are the cases. That's one thing. But the other possible answer is this, that the hard-heartedness of the educated is they have an acquired ideology, where in the heart of hearts they fights within them for a recognition that for the sake of the ideology within you, you are killing for the future good of the society.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Yeah, I think we're out of time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, this conversation actually needs to go on and on and on with copious amounts of tea and coffee, but unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you so much, Professor Nandy.
गैलेंट एडवांस TMT सरिया, इसकी ताकत बने घर की ढाल और इसकी फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी रखे घर को सॉलिड सालों साल। गैलेंट एडवांस TMT सरिया, निर्माण का रियल हीरो।
Where the software engineer meets the gifted content writer, meets the cool UI UX designer, meets the talented photographer to create the big dream. The world comes together at Sharda University. So where are you?
पापा, हीरोज करते क्या है?
वो आपके साथ रहते हैं और आपको प्रोटेक्ट करते हैं। हीरो सिर्फ पर्दे के आगे ही नहीं, दीवारों के पीछे भी। गैलेंट एडवांस TMT सरिया, इसकी ताकत बने घर की ढाल और इसकी फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी रखे घर को सॉलिड सालों साल। गैलेंट एडवांस TMT सरिया, निर्माण का रियल हीरो।
Where the software engineer meets the smart market analyst, meets the gifted content writer to create the big dream. The world comes together at Sharda University. So where are you?
Ideas of India co-presented by Dabur Vedic Tea, चाय का वही लाजवाब स्वाद अब सेहत के साथ। Co-powered by Dr. Ortho, अब दर्द भी घुटने टेकेगा। Gallant Advanced TMT सरिया, निर्माण का रियल हीरो। अब आएगा खाने में असली स्वाद राजेश मसाले के साथ। Driven by Maruti Suzuki. Technology partner, create today, enrich tomorrow, Panasonic. Gold partner, Senco Gold and Diamonds, design of India for you. Partner, Biko Vachdanti, India का गम एक्सपर्ट, मजेदार नहीं असरदार। रमी बोले तो जंगली रमी, India's most trusted रमी site. Get quick loans from Tata Capital. बदलते भारत की नई गैस, Go Gas. Clean and dry. #1 expert intimate care range. Sidco, we make sittings. MMRDA rebooting Mumbai. Knowledge partner, Sharda University. The world is here at Sharda University. Accredited A+ by NAC.
ये जो मौजूदा पार्टियां हैं, ये अच्छा काम कर ले। मैं बार बार कहता हूं, हम एक दूसरे से क्यों नहीं सीखते, एक दूसरे को साथ मिलके क्यों नहीं काम करते, लड़ते क्यों रहते हैं इस देश के अंदर हम। अब जैसे एक छोटा सा उदाहरण देता हूं,